It is an absolute pleasure to welcome author Michelle Arscott to our series of author interviews. Welcome, Michelle, who is based in Nairobi, Kenya. And thank you so much for taking the time to share your book, Jake's Joyful Bubbles, with us here on The Author's Voice. So before we get stuck into your book, please tell us a bit more about yourself. How did you become a children's writer?
I mean, if we were like going back to the very beginning, from a child, I was the child who always had my nose in a book. I was the child that when I was at secondary school, my teacher would always get me to read out my stories to the class. And then fast forward, I became a teacher in the UK and quickly started specialising in the teaching of literacy. And I loved it so much that I became a consultant. So then I was supporting teachers around the country on how to teach literacy in a creative manner. So as teachers, because I know that I'm talking to a teacher crowd here, when we're modeling writing, we're always showing children different ways to write stories. So I had many ideas when I was in the classroom, and many ideas that actually could have become books. But it wasn't until a lot later that I was inspired through my work. I'm now a kids life coach. So my writing has very much come from that now. So Jake's Joyful Bubbles actually came about during the pandemic, and it's very much due to what I was doing. So I was doing a lot of work with children about mindfulness. I was doing an accreditation to become a mindfulness teacher, also practicing it myself. So things like gratitude and appreciation of nature were things that got me going through the pandemic. And then the book came because what is writing? It's creativity. It's about what's influencing you. So I had to write a loving kindness meditation as part of my accreditation for the mindfulness teacher course. And I wrote that, and then Jake's Joyful Bubbles came about from that. And writing is about what's going on inside us. And I have another book, which is actually the first one that I wrote, The Girl with the Red Cape, still to be published, but it will be coming out in 2021. And that is about bullying, because I do a lot of work with children about standing up to bullying. So this story, and it's such a beautiful book, came out of that in terms of a girl's journey at school being bullied, and how she realizes that she has the answer within, and how she turns it around and stands up to the bully.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So can you tell us a little bit more about Jake's Joyful Bubbles? What is that book about?
Right, so on the surface, it's a very simple story. A boy who's bored, his mom is busy, on the computer, on the phone, working from home, and she tells him to go into the garden. And then he has an adventure in the garden, and all the magic of nature comes through, and he's in the moment, because this book is an introduction to mindfulness and the loving kindness meditation. So it's very much about the simple joys that one can get from the garden. And then as a consequence, we see these bubbles begin to form from his heart.
Oh.
And it's very much left open in the story as to what's the significance of those bubbles. So it's very much touching on the loving kindness, so thinking what makes you feel happy and then passing it on to other people. Simple on the surface, but actually quite a lot of discussion can happen underneath. And I do actually include at the end Q&A questions, and also some mindfulness activities that follow on quite nicely from the story.
You have mentioned the fact that you yourself were a teacher, so you've got that deep familiarity with the national curriculum in terms of the reading objectives, and the comprehension element, which teachers need to balance with reading for pleasure. So can you give a little bit more about how your book would fit within a classroom setting in terms of deepening understanding?
If we're talking about the inference and justification part of the curriculum, I'm going to share an actual page here, which as a teacher, I also highlighted. But you can see that this page, so we've had the story which has led up to Jake experiencing the garden. And then we've got this page, which is very much open to interpretation. So at the end of the, there is a letter from the author at the end of the book where I explain an interpretation, my interpretation, but it's very much open. So with, with the questioning, we can ask the children, what do they, what are these bubbles? What do they contain? So children, as we know, they can see things that we don't see. And as you know, as a reader, or if you think about when you watch a movie, there's always different levels that people can interpret this. So this is a very much open page as to what is the significance of these bubbles? What does this mean, this scene with the mom? And then it continues as well on the last page, because again, on this page, there's no text. So it's, what is the implication? What is the significance of this globe? And why are those people happy? What's the bubbles? So there's so much there in terms of that whole inference and justification section. Also, in terms of content and meaning, I did play around with some things in the book, not many, but I'll just share with you again the sort of things that I played around with. So there's this section where he fell. So as you can see, then he jumped like a frog, but he fell. So talking about why, as the author, why did I choose to portray that particular sentence like that? And then there's another example in the book where this is the only reference to the bubbles in the book. The rest is then up to the reader to interpret from the pictures. Some people struggle with this, but I think it's great from a teacher perspective, because I think that's what it's about exploring. Why does the author stop at this point and not mention the bubbles before? Why? And then looking at the pictures and saying, what is the interpretation we can get, even though there's no mention of those bubbles again? And here we began, a bubble began in his heart and started getting bigger. And there you can see that I've messed around with the font size. So all different ways of just bringing that text alive.
Thank you so much. That's a very good insight. And I have often said to children, even in my own lessons, that authors do things quite deliberately for a purpose. If you see any kind of deliberate change, explore it, find out why, what's the meaning behind that. So I think at this point that we should just hand over to you so that you can read an extract from your wonderful book, Jake's Joyful Bubbles.
So Jake's Joyful Bubbles by me, Michelle Arscott. And then if we just look at the interior, which is very beautiful. Jake was bored. Mom, will you play with me, he asked. I will later, she whispered. Go and play outside for now. Will you play with me? Jake asked his neighbour. In a little while, said the neighbour. Jake saw ants and began to march. He felt the cool breeze on his skin and swelled like the falling leaf. He watched the lazy bee resting on the flower and began to buzz like a bee. Then he jumped like a frog, but he fell.
Just based on that reading, would you say that your book is ideal for early readers to Key Stage 1?
Yes, so basically I deliberately kept the text very simple. So the book is for 2 to 6-year-olds. I mean, you can take it to older levels because you can talk about what implied and look at it from the author perspective. But in terms of pleasure, I think it's very much for your 2 to 5 to 6-year-olds. And I really aimed it at the early reader. So also those 5, 6-year-olds or a bit older, they can actually read the book. So it's very nice because on one level it's simple. And then, as I said, on another level, you can really explore the significance of the pictures and the mindfulness and Jake's joyful bubbles.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing your wonderful book with teachers. It is always such a pleasure to hear the author's voice behind the children's books. So finally, can you just let us know where can we purchase your book here in the UK?
It's available on amazon.co.uk. You can get it in the paperback version, and it's also now available on Kindle as an ebook.
Amazing. We absolutely look forward to hearing more about your books as your writing journey continues. We'll make sure we place links for Jake's Joyful Bubbles with this video Thank you so much for joining ReadMaster for UK Teachers, home of the author's voice. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you so much. Thank you.